r/AskReddit. What's the most legendary thing that happened in your school? I took an A+ course in high school. We had an alright sized lab room for stripping computers and another room full of computers for other work or lessons. There were a few stuffed animals in the lesson room as a half-assed attempt by my teacher to decorate. Those come into play later. My teacher kept finding porn history on one of the computers. It was always horribly spelled or incoherent searches, and she assumed it was a freshman being a smartass to impress his friends during a different class. One day she gets fed up with it and makes a special project for us nerds in her A+ course. She gave us one of the lab computers and the smallest cam she could find and asked us to make a hidden camera. We complied and made a decent one and brought it into the other room, set it to record with more than enough hard drive space, and aimed it at the perp's putter. The next day we fire up the vid and see one of the seniors coming in before school starts, googling some porn and giving himself the old wax job. He cleaned up with one of the stuffed animals and went about his business. She threw out the stuffed animals and the cops got involved. Kid got into trouble, but went into the army after high school, so maybe it all worked out in the end. Oh boy, here's my A+ class stories. So teacher changed and only kept the A+ course ilk for 1 year, but under the previous teacher the final was to set up a computer, format/partition a hard drive, and then install Windows 98, Windows XP and a Linux distro on the partitions with specific software. 1 year a single student did all the work and promptly cloned it to all other students. The second story does involve porn. This was when I was in the advanced class, i.e. I took a second year of it. A couple of the seniors hated this one kid, who was pretty annoying, so they wrote a batch file and placed it in the startup folder. The batch file opened a 10-second clip of interracial gay porn, and the seniors had the volume turned all the way up on external speakers. The victim turned on his computer with the teacher standing right behind him, and instead of unplugging the power, went for the speaker cable. The teacher later had the second year students, including myself and the senior who had done it, fix the guy's computer. My high school was a bit on the sketchy side. During my sophomore year there was a fire, and despite all the fire drills we'd been doing since kindergarten, no one really knew what to do. Some students made their way 10 blocks away to a Wendy's and a Waldbaum's, where they proceeded to rob both. At the end of my junior year, this sophomore threw his freshman girlfriend through a display case. She ended up with 13 stitches, and he got a lovely pair of handcuffs. In my senior year, we got a new principal, because the old one quit at the end of the year prior. Anyway, this was the year the 5th Harry Potter book came out, and even before the school year started people were calling her Umbridge, because of her reputation at her last school. Most of us thought she couldn't be that bad. Then we met her. She really was awful. To make matters worse, she was racist to boot. One of the black teachers didn't agree with her teaching style, so she fired his lazy N******GER in her words. Within a week, the narc was at the school. Before she finally resigned, there was a student walkout and people started throwing cafeteria fruit at her whenever they saw her. We were all glad to be rid of her. When I was in grade 9, I was sitting in the computer lab working, and during the communications class, all of a sudden, we hear this loud revving getting louder and louder, something passing by very quickly then fading away. Our teacher ran out of the room after it, and crike, I had no idea the man could move that quickly. I was in crutches due to a sports injury, so I had to hobble out behind the rest of the class as we tried to find out what was going on. Apparently, one of seniors brought an ATV to school and drove through the halls. What was legendary was that he somehow was never caught. Edit. I love the internet. Half the replies are about my 6 AM sleepy mistype, all of a sudden. I mean, it's technically not wrong. Edit. More detail. This was in Canada, in the early 2000s. There was a video floating somewhere on FB, which means it's probably lost forever. Pretty crappy, since it was literally one of the early digital cameras taped onto the guy's helmet. If I remember correctly, they let him in through an unused auto classroom side door, and he rode out the back. The area was very rural, so he probably drove it in instead of in the back of a pickup. Most likely rode it straight home too, so yeah, no proof at the end of it. Jeff jumped off the roof of the chapel into a dumpster filled with empty cardboard boxes. 50-foot drop, 8x8 dumpster. Edit, we are gathered here today to mourn the inbox of a kralopede. Edit 2, some background. Twice a week at our school, the junior and senior guys were on garbage/recycling duty after lunch. We'd gather all the garbage bags and recycling from the classrooms and offices. The building was a school attached to a church with offices and a sort of community center. It wasn't a huge building, but it was pretty big. We'd take all the garbage and trash out to the dumpster, which was set next to some sheds behind the building. That's how it all started, Jeff jumping off a 10 to 12 foot shed into a dumpster full of cardboard boxes. We'd laugh, roll the dumpster out to where the garbage guy could get to it. Someone else rolled it back when garbage was collected. One day Jeff climbed the backstop of the baseball field right near the dumpsters. That was a 25 to 30 foot drop, I think. He made that one look easy. Then he dropped in from out of a tree that was probably about 40 feet. Finally, about a month from our graduation, he told us his plan. He had to break into the crawl space above the chapel, accessible by a padlock trapdoor on the 3rd floor of classrooms, then climb up through the attic space of the chapel and onto the roof. The chapel parking lot sloped sharply by about 7 to 8 feet, which is where the 50-foot drop comes in. We saved boxes for weeks, set them up in the dumpster, put it in the parking lot about 15 feet from the chapel wall, and watched him jump. My first day of high school, I was starting at a whole new neighborhood from moving and knew no one, so I kept to myself. I didn't handle crowds all too well, but I mustered the courage to get out of bed and get ready for school. I ran downstairs and talked to my dad about what I expected to get out of the day and ate breakfast. I walked out to the corner to catch the school bus, and that was awful. Nowhere to sit as everyone felt they each had their own damn seat. Story short, I made it to school. As soon as we made it to the school, I started walking to my locker. There were so many people I was about to lose my mind, and I asked myself if it could get any worse. It did. A girl bumped me from behind to get ahead to catch up with someone. In one swift action, she ripped off her backpack and unzipped it to pull out a kitchen knife to stab the girl directly in front of me right in the back. I froze. I couldn't breathe. I felt dizzy. I turned around and walked straight home. I lived about 10 miles away. I just kept walking. I never looked back. I just wanted to make it home, crawl upstairs, and sleep in. 2 years ago, the app Yik Yak was growing in popularity at my school. Maybe about 25% of the student population had it, but since it is anonymous, people started roasting other people through it. Just as people were no longer using Yik Yak, our shithead principal heard about people roasting other people. He made an announcement talking about Yik Yak and digital citizenship. Naturally, everyone re-downloaded the app, and anybody who didn't previously have it downloaded it as well. Word quickly got out that some teachers got Yik Yak as well and were monitoring it. People started to post stuff like "fight in the art hallway" and laugh as a group of 3 teachers would speed walk by then towards the art hallway, on to find out there was no fight and see the next post "fight in the cafeteria." This went on for 45 minutes until people moved on to better pranks. "I'm pulling the fire alarm next period." Shithead principal misread this as firearm and called a lockdown on the school, which lasted for 80 minutes, and there were cop cases all around the school. Later that night, my school was on the news, and Yik Yak is now blocked within 100 meters, I think, of any school in my school board. TL. Doctor, my school got Yik Yak banned in my entire school board. Edit. Maybe it wasn't just my school board. Maybe it's all of Canada or something. I'm really not so sure. I went to a professional training high school. We had to choose a major for our senior year, and on Tuesday and Thursdays, we would spend the entire day in classes involving our chosen major. Strange, yay. Only lasted for a few years. Now it's just a regular magnet school. Whatever. Here's my story. My tech teacher was cool as fuck. He'd give us a project on Tuesday morning, and we'd have until Thursday afternoon to turn it in. If we were done early, have fun on the internet. If late, well, that's a strike on your grade. Most of the students busted ass on projects on Tuesdays, so we could watch Jerry Springer on the TV cart in the back of the room on Thursdays. Me and 2 other kids would play Warcraft 2nd on the network computers we set up. Seriously, this teacher didn't give a fuck, as long as our work was done. One Thursday, one of the students in my class was flipping around the in-service channels the school had. Sometimes they would play a movie on it for some class. Guess what? Porn. Hard fucking core black on black porn. Student quickly turned it down and turned the TV from the line of view of the teacher. Teacher still heard it. He came over, coffee cup in hand. Looked at the class, looked at the TV that wasn't turned off in time, looked back at the class, took a sip. First off, anyone offended? Class, no. Keep it low. If someone comes in, turn it off. In high school we weren't allowed to wear costumes for Halloween. My senior year a giant group of us, about a good half or 3/4 of the class decided that we're going to dress up anyway and meet in the parking lot before school to march in together. I spent the night before making my costume, which was a suit of armor made out of cardboard with metallic tape, a sword made the same way, and one of those broomstick horses. The next day we all gathered, like we had said, and marched it together. It was hilarious, but I guess they found out, so the deans and assistant deans were waiting for us in the cafeteria to take our IDs, so we could report to detention. One of my friends had dressed up as an ATM that he made out of cardboard. When they asked him for his ID he was ready and slipped it out of a slot like a debit card. The best part was at the end of the day, when we all gathered for detention. They didn't have enough room for us and all the other people that were there for other reasons. Out of frustration they decided to make our detentions Saturday ones and spread them out. It was totally worth it though. Late to the party, but worth a shot. At our school, UK, on the year 11's final day of the year they would do egg and flour day. Essentially, pelting the lower years with eggs and flour. This was a long-standing tradition at my school and went back decades. As you can imagine, with parents understandably annoyed at the sight of the kids coming home covered in mess, the school received a lot of complaints. Because of this, the school clamped down on it in the past 2 to 3 years with huge punishments for those caught taking part. To get around this, the year 11s typically moved the location to somewhere off grounds where students could be ambushed on the way home. Typically the local shops. Anyway, it was our turn. We were the year 11s now. We wanted to make our mark. A group of around 10 or so of us got together towards the end of the year and started brainstorming. It took us about a week to come up with it, and it was perfect. Or so we thought. Here was the plan. The school was recently going through some renovations, so a few things were moved around, and a few areas were off limits, including one of the fields. Now this field was where we would go in the event of a fire drill. Because of this, the fire drill point was moved to the tennis courts. Great. Why was this great? Because the tennis courts bordered on the local woods. The very edge of these woods were bordered by incredibly dense growth that was very difficult to see anything through. Between the growth and the tennis courts was a 10-foot fence, and just behind the growth was a pathway. Perfect. So the plan was set. We will send a guy inside, get him to pull the fire alarm, then send a barrage of eggy flour death to the unsuspecting lower year peasants beyond the fence. Skip forward to the day of the event. We sent Tim in to be the man on the inside. We were ready and waiting in the woods, armed to the teeth with pancake ingredients. We waited a long time. It must have been an hour and a half at that point. We'll come back to this later. This was before mobile phones, so we had no contact with the man on the inside. An oversight. We sent in Christian to find out what was going on. And we waited. Not long this time. 20 minutes later the bell went off. It was happening. First we would only hear the piercing ring of the bell. A minute later, the loud chatter of many prepubescent voices. It got louder and louder. The tennis court was filling up. Students were getting into their lines. We waited for the perfect moment to strike. A few more minutes later, things quietened down. We started to hear the teachers shooting out names, going through their registers. This was it. Time to strike. With the students now silent, it was time to unsilent them. Without saying a word, we unleashed. Cartons of eggs were emptied into the air, over the fence, and down onto the underlings to the most satisfying crack splits. Flour baggies were spilt and tossed over, leaving trails of white smoke, before landing with a puff, and filling up the area with clouds of potential biscuit. The screams. Oh, were they glorious. The complete sound of chaos. It started with silence. Shock as to what was going on. Then the fear set in. Nobody wanted to be egged. The tennis courts exploded into a mass of running kids, dodging yoke, trying to get out of the way. Teachers trying to find out what was going on, barking orders and trying to calm everyone down to little success. And that was it. Within 60 seconds we had exhausted our ammo and it was time to retreat. Laughing hysterically and celebrating our accomplishment, we melted back into the woods and fell back to our meeting point. It was done. We were legends. Now let's fast forward a week. Remember Tim? The guy in the inside who took too long pulling the alarm. Turns out he didn't pull alarm because we noticed they were all covered by CCTV. Another oversight. When Christian went in, he didn't bother looking and pulled the first alarm he came across. He was called into the school a few days later and ordered to give a list of names. It was either he did or prom would be cancelled that year. Can't blame him really. I probably would have done the same thing. Those who were on the list, the choice was either 8 hours community service in the school or be barred from prom. We all took the service and spent the day with the school caretaker doing absolutely fuck all. It was great. 10/10ths would egg again. I'm from a small town in Indiana. That means two things. Nobody really knows what you're talking about when you say where you're from. Here in Indiana, you're either from around Fort Wayne or around Indianapolis. You never see fights break out. Maybe a little slap fest, but that's it. The worst I'd witnessed before this was this one girl dumping Gatorade on another girl. Nothing exciting. But this day broke both stereotypes. We were put on a hard lockdown that day, meaning we had to sit in class until the teacher released us. We missed the entirety of third period, sitting there in second period, while our teachers got bored and started watching cat videos with us on YouTube. Typically, a hard lockdown means a shooter got in the school or something, but nope. That apparently wasn't what was going on. A senior, who was over 18, got in a fight with a freshman over a sophomore girl, and then they pushed each other out a fucking window. We were on the news. You don't say you're from around Fort Wayne anymore. Nowadays in Indiana you can get away with saying we're from that town, where the kids went out a window. Edit. I just need to clarify some misinformation on this. Sorry about everything. Yes, some people also say I'm from around Chicago or I'm from direction, Indiana. My point was, you'll never hear a guy tell you they're from Wabash, Indiana. Second, I seem to have miscalculated the impact of the window shatter. It was on the Fort Wayne news station, so only people in Northeast Indiana know about it. I'm not going to confirm the location, so please don't try to send me your guesses. Finally, we don't really say we are from the place where the kid went out the window. Usually, if you do happen to say the name of your town/high school, people will respond with "Isn't that where those kids went through a window?" I had a teacher who was effectively the resident badass of the corporation. I may have a few details incorrect, but his story went something like this. He drops out of high school about junior year and joins the army. He gets tired of that and decides to go be a lawyer and passes the bar exam. Is later awarded his GED after practicing law for a few years. Gets bored again and goes back to school to be a teacher at the very same school he dropped out of. Now teaches IB classes and changes departments on a whim, typically due to fatigue with the material. The funny thing is, what he was remembered mostly for was having a student attempt to take out some aggression on him, resulting in said student being forcibly moved down a flight of stairs and placed in a headlock until authorities arrived. Edit. A lot of people commented about not being able to become a lawyer without a GED. I don't believe he was practicing law before being awarded the GED. Also, he's about 40 or 50 at my best guess, so he may have been able to do that at the time. Background. 4 years ago, went to a small Christian high school. Open campus accessed from the outside, not one big building entered through inside. This school was hell. To attend we had to sign a document that let them breach our rights to privacy, and they could go through our phones, texts, backpacks without any probably cause. Drug testing students randomly, paid by our tuition. Drug dogs on campus that never caught anything in my 4 years and paid by tuition. Every class loved to hate the school, it was like the establishment. Anyhow, had these group of 4 kids in my high school, couple years older than me, come to school one night and wipe shit everywhere on the windows of our classrooms and inside of the door handles. Teachers got real pissed at that clever move. One teacher was so infuriated he says to our class, fuck the senior class, absolutely enraged. Anyhow, they cancelled prom and our student pride week unless one of them came forward. For at least 2 weeks no one came forward and no one knew if it was even a senior prank or just kids from elsewhere. Every day at the end of school our principal would come on and reiterate his blank threats and we all just laughed. I was a sophomore, so I didn't care about prom. After a couple weeks the principal cancelled graduation. Parents were outraged and school quickly stood firm that there'd be no graduation and everyone would just be mailed diplomas. Eventually one of the group came forward and snitched. One kid lost a scholarship for D1 sports, another was the class president, and the other 2 were expelled. Best part about it is we deemed them the perpetrators, which remains the most infamous nickname of our school's history. This story is real, 100% true. Shout out to the perpetrators that were as fed up as all of us. AWW, damn. Can't believe I'm late to this one. Got a good one. That didn't happen to me, but I, and probably 70% of my high school, got the recording of when it happened. It was recorded by a music student doing a project on acoustics, and the teacher was my history teacher as well. Funny, awesome guy. So what set him off was a guy throwing a pen across the room to his friend to write down notes, though it wasn't just that set him off. The guy who threw the pen was probably the stupidest and sloppiest person of his year. Mind you, this was a British private school, so we had a uniform dress code, shirt tucked out, sagging pants, no belt, long hair, using his shoes as slippers, by walking on the heels, etc. I know because he was in my carpool. Well, him throwing the pen was the last straw and the teacher exploded. 3 minutes of pure beautiful insults that made everyone who heard it laugh to the point of tears. I sometimes sympathize with him, the teacher, but he should kept his cool. He was fired at the end of that day as they took the recording to